Hey guys, Julian here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make lo-fi house like Kettama. I've gotten a few requests for this one. It's a little more obscure, but I figured why not try it? So yeah, let's dive in. And before I actually do that, just to let you all know, you can get the project file and samples and MIDI and all that kind of stuff from this video in the description, so make sure to check that out. And yeah, here we go. So I'm going to start with the drums. The drums are a pretty important part of Kettama's style. They're definitely one of the defining things. So I'm going to start with that. So the first thing we have here is this kick, which sounds like this. And so the way I made this was pretty simple, actually. Basically, I just took this kick, kind of just like a powerful 909 style kick or like a drum machine type kick. And what I did was I sort of used saturation to just shape it and give it that kind of harder edge sound. So what we have here is we have a little bit of drive, and I turned up the bass frequency. And that's pretty much it with the saturator. I think I messed with the filter frequency as well down here on the analog clip. If you don't know, the analog clip just sort of allows you to shape the saturation a little bit more. You can use any other color mode as well, but analog clip tends to be the best for these lo-fi house kind of sounds. So yeah, and then I believe I pitched that down. Yeah, I pitched that down -2 as well. So you can hear it just gives it that powerful, boomy kind of kick sound. And also something I want to note here is you'll see as we go through here, but there's actually no bass in this track. And the reason for that is because this kick is really doing all of the bass stuff here. I heard this in a lot of Kettama's music. It sounds like he tends to just make his kicks really big and boomy and then let that be the bass. So that was what I did here. So then the next thing we have are these hi-hats / percussions, which sound like this. So the way that I made these was I actually took Ableton's 909 core kit, so it's just the one that's under drums here. That one. If you have Ableton, you probably have it. It's just a pretty solid 909, and it's good to use as a bass. So what I did here was basically that's what I did was I set up. So I have these hi-hats and the closed hi-hats and the open hi-hats. And those are kind of what are making up the backbone of this pattern. And then we have these little percussions like I was saying. Like that one, and that one, and that one. And also that kick at the end, just sort of accentuating the pattern. You know, without those, it's kind of just some open hi-hats and some closed hi-hats, but when you add those, they don't really get in the way, and that's because of some of the processing, which I'll show you in a second. But yeah, it just kind of adds some nice accentuation to the pattern, and complements it pretty nicely. So then as far as programming goes on these, like I said, I kind of just used this Core 909 as a bass. Not a bass as in a bass, the low end of your track, but a bass as in a foundation. And I use that as sort of the foundation, and then I just kind of built on that using effects. So what I did here was I added this EQ8 first off that was just kind of adding this sort of lo-fi quality to the sound. If I take it off and then turn it on, you can hear it's just cutting out all the low end, so it's helping with these toms and that little kick at the end there, and it makes them not as powerful, and it just makes them more light percussion that kind of sits over it, if that makes any sense. And then I just cut off some of the high end and added a very small boost on the Q with this one, and that's what's really giving it the lo-fi sound. You can hear that kind of makes a pretty big difference. So then after that, I added the saturator, which just kind of beefs everything up and helps to glue it all together. Saturation can be really good for gluing a lot of different percussion together. If you have a lot of different sounds, and especially drums that all kind of sound like they're not really, together, try putting some saturation on them as a group, and it'll make them a little bit, more tied together. So that was what I did here. Just turn the drive up and turn that bass frequency up, as well as the filter frequency. And that was how we got those. So then the next thing here is this clap. It's pretty straightforward. Just kind of a powerful, drum machine style clap. There's the original sample. And then I just put it through the saturator. You can hear it just adds a bit more, kind of grit to the sound and a bit more distortion. And, this is, again, going with, what I was saying. For Kettama's drums, you just really want to use a lot of saturation and kind of, take a sound that sounds pretty good and shape it using the saturation. So that was what I did with this clap. So the next thing we have here is this little vocal sample, which comes in the second half. Sounds like this. So the approach I took here was basically I took this vocal sample. You can hear it sounds like that. And what I did was I put it into a simpler and then kind of played it that way, which if you've seen my videos and just kind of know how, like a lot of people do this, you would probably know this isn't really the most preferred way to work with vocal samples, because when you have it in a simpler, all you can do is play it from start to finish. You can just play through the sample. You can't like chop it up. You can't take little parts of it. It would obviously be much better usually to just put your vocal sample into the arrangement. However, the reason why I did it this way is because I wanted this kind of like lo-fi, old school kind of vibe. The thing about old school house is that when they used to have vocal samples and stuff like this in it, they couldn't really, they couldn't just put it into the arrangement because they were working with like sequencers and samplers. It didn't really work that way, so you would have to put it into a sampler. And I think this is what Kettama does because he's trying to invoke that kind of old school sound so much. So that was what I did here. So I just kind of put it into here. And you can hear I just kind of played around with essentially the length of each of the notes. And that's what gives you that cool kind of like percussive effect. So yeah, and then as far as effects go on this, you can hear here's the dry sample once again. And then what I added was an overdrive. So the only thing I played with here was the drive and the dry wet. I just put the dry wet all the way up and turned the drive up a little bit. And that just gives it a little bit more of, again, like a lo-fi kind of edge. And then I added this ping pong delay on 16 notes because I thought it made it sound a little bit more like old school. Like there are a lot of like old school house tracks that would start with something like this. Like maybe it would be just like the vocal sample and the hi-hats and the clap. You can hear it kind of gives you that cool groove. So I just thought it was a nice little thing to add there. So the next thing we have here is the main chord stab, which sounds like this, and it's actually 2 layers. So the way that I made this was I started with this little stab, which you can hear is kind of where most of the sound is coming from. So if you don't know like what a stab is, it's essentially just a little quick synth sound like this. And what I did was I put it into a simpler and then played in this little pattern. So just kind of like a, Kettama style pattern. One thing I will note about this actually though is a lot of his like patterns when he does like stabs like this and stuff are usually very like old school hardcore sounding. If you don't know what hardcore is, there are kind of like a few different styles of it within dance music. But I'm sort of more talking about like the faster stuff where it has like, harder hitting kicks, usually around like 140 to 150 BPM, and then like break beats. If you want to know like how to write these kind of patterns, I really recommend listening to a bunch of old school hardcore. Like literally just look it up on YouTube or Google it, and you'll find a ton of different playlists. But that is where a lot of these kind of patterns come from. So I just played in one of those kind of patterns. And then one more thing I will note about it is you'll notice all the notes that sort of like touch each other or go into each other don't actually touch each other. I made them all just a little bit shorter just by hitting Control A, and then you just do that, and then there you go. None of them are touching each other. It just makes it more percussive and snappy. So then as far as the sound goes, like I said, it's just this little stab that I put into here. Nothing really too much. I did pitch it a little bit because the next layer is a synth. So I just pitched it to put them in tune. And yeah, so then for the next layer, like I said, it's a synth. I made it with analog. We have the same MIDI. And then this one just kind of sits in the background to like accentuate the other one. The thing about using like stab sounds like this is it's cool, but in 2018 and onward, I don't think it really cuts it to just use a stab, by itself. You really kind of have to layer it with something to make it more modern and just sort of more powerful sounding. So that was what I did here. I layered it with this. Basically, we have analog. I have the same MIDI. And then to make it play the same chords as this stab, I just put on this chord here. If you don't know, chord is one of Ableton's MIDI effects. You can put it in. And then all I did was I just put in a +3, +7, and then -12. So we just have like a pretty standard minor chord. And yeah, now as far as the synth sound goes, I used a square wave and analog. It's going into a low pass filter, which has the envelope set like this. So just kind of like a quick sort of, stab, tight and pluggy. And then I set the amp envelope like this to kind of match that. And then, as far as effects go, we just have a little tiny bit of reverb. You can see the dry wet is over 50%, but the decay time is pretty short and the size is kind of small. So again, it's just keeping it tight and, quick and plucky, but still adding that extra bit of space. And then after that, I just added a saturator. Again, just trying to give sounds, like I was saying with the drums, you just sort of want to, start with a sound and then shape it with saturation. So that was what I did. I gave it a bit of drive, and then I played around with the analog clip a bit. And we got that sound, and again, it just sort of beefs up that main stab. So then the last thing I will talk about here is this little ending here, which just has these two stabs. So all I did here was I just cut out the kick and kept the hi-hat and the clap going and then the vocal sample. And then we have these two little stabs. So I actually just kind of layered two together. I didn't really feel like I needed to make one with a synth to get this one to sound more modern and powerful. So we just have this stab and then this one. And then they're playing the same pattern, but again, this kind of works on the same thing like I was saying with the other stab where I layered the two layers together. Except here I just used two samples, so we just have two samples that really complement each other well. Like this one is kind of in the high end, and then that's more of like, the impact that you hear. And like, you can hear like, and see, I didn't even have to EQ these or process them or anything to get it to sound this way. It just sounds solid because they just work together well. They don't clash with each other. So yeah, and then one more thing I will talk about is master processing, because I think it's very important if you want to get this kind of like rough, gritty, lo-fi house that just really sort of like, just really hits, and like every sound kind of sounds like it's in the same world. So like I was saying, the way you would do that is master processing. So what I did to get my master to sound this way is essentially I added a bit of saturation and a very, very, very small amount of glue compression. So on the saturator here, you can see I didn't really do too much. I just used a little bit of drive and then turned up the bass and the depth on the analog clip a little bit. So this is just kind of like gluing everything together and, giving everything a little bit more of like a saturated edge. I'll show you what that sounds like before and after. So here's before with no master processing. Pretty cool, but definitely not quite as like together as it is when you add it. And then here's with the saturator. You can hear it kind of helps to beef up that kick as well. And then with the glue compressor, all I did was I just turned down the threshold a little bit. So here is with no glue compression. And then with. So you can hear it just kind of, brings out some of those sounds that aren't as prominent. Like, I think it brings out the clap a little bit. And some of those hi-hats as well. And then all I did, you can see it's really not, like, activating that much. As opposed to, like, that. But all I did was just turn the threshold down a little. Until it sounded pretty good. And yeah, so like I said, this master processing, pretty important because it just kind of makes everything sound like it's in the same world. You wouldn't want to do this on every kind of track, but with this style of track where you're trying to really just solidify a particular sound and a particular vibe, definitely a great way to do that. So that's going to be it for today, guys. Make sure to let me know what you think of this video in the comments, and make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. Check out the sample pack from this video. It's in the description, first link. Check out my social media as well. It's on the screen. Thank you again, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow with another tutorial.